The bottle shattered before the laughter reached me. Glass burst against my temple, and the night lurched sideways, like the dock had slipped out from under my boots. I tasted blood, cheap beer, and the sharp salt of the ocean. Fingers hooked into my jacket. A shoulder slammed into mine. I didn't fall, but I let my knees soften, let them believe the hit landed harder than it did. My ears rang. My vision narrowed. I breathed slow and shallow, the way I'd been trained when panic tried to take command. They thought I was just another woman alone near the docks after dark. An easy story. A quick mistake. Waves slapped the pilings beneath us. Diesel hung in the air, mixed with fish and rust. I remember noticing how steady my hands were, how quiet, how calm, while my heart hammered like it wanted out. Calm is a skill you earn the hard way. One of them leaned in and said something I won't repeat. Another laughed, close enough for me to feel it on my neck. None of them knew who I was. None of them knew where I'd been the year before. And none of them understood how much restraint it took for me to stay right there and let them believe they were in control. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I was a Navy Senior Chief Petty Officer at the time, home on leave in the fall of 2013. My name is Rebecca Beck Holloway, and I had just rotated back to the States after a long deployment out of Camp Alder Ridge, a quiet coastal training site outside a small town called Marrow Point, Oregon. Most people had never heard of it. That was by design. Places like that exist to prepare people for work no one is supposed to see. I had been active duty for more than a decade by then. Multiple deployments, long stretches where time collapsed into cycles of preparation, waiting, and controlled violence. I didn't look like what people expected a Navy SEAL to look like. I wasn't tall. I wasn't loud. I didn't carry myself like someone itching for a fight. My hair stayed pulled back tight out of habit. No tattoos visible. No slogans. No bravado. Just tired eyes and a body that moved the way training teaches you to move when attention is dangerous. That night, I wasn't looking for trouble. I'd walked down to the docks because my head wouldn't settle. Being home was harder than I remembered. The quiet felt wrong. There were no radios crackling. No watch rotations. No accountability boards. No one checking in, no one checking out. The absence of structure pressed heavier than body armor ever had. People think coming home is relief. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just noise without purpose. I wore civilian clothes. No identifiers, no unit gear. No weapon, just a thin jacket against the cold and old running shoes I'd worn overseas until the soles were almost smooth. I told myself I was safe. I told myself I was invisible. I was wrong. Marrow Point looks peaceful at night. Fishing boats tied up, sodium lights humming over wet planks. The smell of diesel, salt, and old rope hanging in the air. It's the kind of place locals take for granted and outsiders underestimate. I noticed the group before they noticed me. 4 of them. Loud, unsteady. Drinking hard and feeding off each other's energy the way bored men sometimes do when the night gives them permission. I adjusted my path without thinking, angling closer to the water, giving them space. It's automatic, something drilled into you early. Avoid contact when you can. Control variables. Don't escalate unless you have to. One of them noticed anyway. It starts small. A look held a second too long. A comment tossed out to see if it lands. Laughter, that's less about humor and more about testing boundaries. I kept walking. I kept my shoulders relaxed. I didn't meet their eyes. Every instinct told me this was the right call. It wasn't enough. I heard footsteps behind me before I felt the shove. Not hard. Not yet. Just enough to let me know they were there and wanted me to know it. My balance shifted and I let it. Let my foot slide half an inch more than necessary. Let the movement look clumsy. They smelled like alcohol and sweat and something sour underneath. Adrenaline sharpened the world into small details. The scrape of boots on wet wood. The hollow sound of laughter echoing off the water. The way one of them stood too close, trying to block my path without fully committing. I remember thinking how strange it was that my pulse stayed steady, elevated but controlled. Like it always did when things started to tilt toward danger. Fear feels different when you've lived through worse. Someone said my jacket looked expensive. Someone else joked that I didn't belong down there alone. The words themselves didn't matter. The tone did. Ownership, entitlement. The assumption that proximity meant permission. I measured distances without meaning to. Who was closest? Who was off balance? Who was watching my hands? Who wasn't? I noted the edge of the dock behind me, the gap between pilings, the dark water moving slowly beneath us. I adjusted my stance so my weight sat evenly, knees soft, center low. Nothing obvious, nothing that would read as a challenge. I gave them nothing. That's what seemed to frustrate them most. Men like that expect reactions. Fear, anger, pleading. Something to confirm their control. When they don't get it, they push harder. The bottle came from my left. I didn't see it. I heard the rush of movement just before impact, the air splitting as it swung. The glass shattered against my head, sharp and loud, a burst of white light behind my eyes. Pain flared, then settled into something distant and manageable. I didn't strike back. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't drop to the ground. I bent my knees, let my shoulders dip. Let them believe they'd stun me. Someone grabbed my jacket again, harder this time. Someone laughed close to my ear. My scalp burned where the glass had cut me, warm blood running down into my hair. I focused on breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow, controlled. The way you do when you're counting time between detonations. The way you do when waiting is the most dangerous part. Inside, I was already moving through options. Legal, tactical, environmental. How much force? How many witnesses? How long until someone intervened? How quickly this could go from ugly to irreversible. I didn't want to hurt anyone. That's the part people never understand. Training teaches you how to end fights, not how to start them. Violence is a tool, not an outlet, and once you use it, you own everything that follows. So I stayed still. I let them believe I was scared. I let them believe I was weak. I let them believe the night belonged to them. And while they laughed and closed in, none of them realized they were standing less than an arm's length from someone who had spent years learning exactly how much restraint it takes not to end a threat immediately. The first warning sign was how the laughter cut off the moment I passed them. Not faded, not drifted away. It stopped sharp and deliberate. 3 men stood near a pickup parked crooked by the pier, its engine ticking as it cooled. I clocked their spacing without thinking. Too tight. Too intentional. The second warning came when one of them peeled away from the group and fell in behind me, matching my pace a half step slower than natural. I told myself not to escalate, not to assume intent. This wasn't a hostile zone. This was home. A dock I'd walked as a teenager, a town where nothing ever happened. That hesitation almost cost me. I changed direction, angling toward the water where the light thinned. Footsteps followed. I slowed, just slightly, enough to confirm the mirror. He slowed too. My shoulders stayed loose, casual, but my mind shifted gears the way it always had when things went sideways. Distance. Angles. Lines of movement. The water was to my left, dark and cold. Warehouses loomed to my right, locked, silent, useless for cover. No clean exits. No witnesses close enough to matter. I felt the space around me narrow, not physically, but psychologically. That pressure you recognize only if you felt it before, the sense of being selected. A voice drifted from behind me. Shh. Low, mocking, mocking. Not loud enough to draw attention, but close enough to claim territory. I didn't respond. I kept walking, counting steps, letting my pace stay even. Responding gives them information. Silence denies it. Another laugh followed, closer now. I smelled alcohol, heard the scrape of boots on damp planks. The air felt thick, heavy with salt and something sour. I adjusted my stride by inches, aligning my balance without making it obvious. Knees soft, weight centered. Hands relaxed at my sides, fingers loose. Nothing that read as readiness. I still told myself this could end without contact. People back off sometimes when they realize you won't play along. Sometimes they lose interest. Sometimes they don't. The bottle came from my blind side, clean and fast. No warning shout. No dramatic wind-up. Just the sudden rush of movement and the sound of glass breaking against bone. The impact flashed white behind my eyes. Pain bloomed hot and sharp, then settled into something distant and manageable, like a wave that crests and pulls back. Amateur violence. Alcohol-driven. Group courage. The kind meant to stun and dominate, not kill. A show of control. I felt the old instinct surge up immediately. The one carved into muscle memory over years of training. Strike first. Break contact. Disable the closest threat and create space. End it fast. End it fast. But another instinct clamped down harder. The one that understood consequences. Uniform or not, I was still accountable, still subject to rules, laws, optics. One wrong decision here, one broken neck, one shattered spine in the wrong context, and everything I'd built could vanish. Career. Freedom. The quiet life I was trying to step back into. I tasted blood, warm, metallic. Felt it slide down into my hair. Someone grabbed my jacket, yanking me back half a step. Another voice laughed, louder now, emboldened by the hit. I let my knees bend. Let my shoulders dip. Let the moment read as shock instead of control. They crowded closer. That was their mistake, even if they didn't know it yet. I focused on breathing. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Slow. Measured. The way you breathe when you're waiting for the right second. The way you breathe when reacting too early would make things worse. Inside, everything was moving. I cataloged positions. Who was closest? Who was behind me? Who was leaning in too far, off balance? I noted where the dock edge dropped into black water, where a misstep would matter. I listened for other footsteps, other voices, any signs someone else might be approaching. Nothing. The laughter shifted, toneless, playful now, more hungry. Words were said, ugly ones. The kind meant to reduce you to an object, to strip you down until resistance feels pointless. I didn't answer. I didn't look at them. I kept my gaze unfocused, slightly downward, letting my posture communicate what they wanted to see. Submission. Fear. Weakness. The truth was more complicated. Training doesn't make you violent. It makes you aware. Aware of how quickly things can go wrong. Aware of how fragile bodies are. Aware of how final certain actions become once you cross a line. I didn't want to hurt anyone. That's the part people don't expect. They think capability means eagerness. It doesn't. It means restraint backed by certainty. It means knowing exactly what you could do and choosing not to unless there's no other option left. So I absorbed the shove. I let the grip on my jacket tighten. I let them believe the advantage was theirs. I waited, because waiting in moments like that is not hesitation. It's control. They circled tighter. Hands tugged at my jacket. Voices rose, overlapping and sloppy. As the ringing in my ears faded, my vision sharpened instead of blurring. That always happens. Panic, narrows the world for people who don't know how to manage it. For me, clarity arrives first. I saw the weak points immediately. Bad foot placement on wet planks. Weight too far forward. Hands grabbing instead of guarding. Overconfidence built on numbers instead of coordination. The kind that looks dangerous until it collapses under pressure. Inside my head, the dock disappeared. In its place was something colder. Ordered. Familiar. The mental space you enter when decision replaces emotion. I ran through options the way I had 1,000 times in training, quietly, quickly, without drama. Minimal force. Control. Disengage. Escape. No strikes that couldn't be justified later. No movements that couldn't be explained if this ended under flashing lights instead of silence. Another shove came, harder this time. I let it move me. Let my boots slide half a step on the damp wood. I pitched forward on purpose and caught myself on a piling, my palm flat, fingers spread. Someone laughed behind me. Someone else said, "She's done." That sentence landed differently than the bottle. "She's done" isn't about confidence. It's about ownership. It's the moment when people stop thinking and start assuming the outcome is decided. That was when I chose. I turned fast, not wildly, not with anger, but with precision. My elbow came up into the nearest chest, tight and compact, driving straight through the center line. Not full power. Full power caves ribs and creates problems you can't walk away from. This was just enough to collapse breath and posture at the same time. Air left his lungs in a sharp, involuntary sound, and his upper body folded without drama. Before anyone else could process that shift, my heel clipped a knee behind me. Low. Controlled. The joint wasn't meant to take force from that angle. The leg gave, and a body hit the planks hard enough to knock the laughter out of the night. Everything happened inside a breath. The third man froze, not because he was brave or disciplined, but because shock takes time to translate into action. He stared at me like the script had changed without warning, like the version of the night he'd been promised had just evaporated. I didn't chase him. That's another mistake people make when they've never been trained properly. They think winning means finishing. It doesn't. Winning means creating space and getting out before the situation escalates beyond control. I stepped back into the opening I'd made, hands up but relaxed, palms open, non-threatening to anyone watching from a distance. My body stayed angled, weight-centered, ready to move again if I had to. The men on the ground were struggling to orient themselves, surprise written all over their faces. Surprise hurts more than pain in moments like that. One of them tried to stand too quickly and stumbled. Another swore, clutching his chest, sucking air like it wasn't coming fast enough. The third took an instinctive step back. That was enough. I moved past them, not running, not slow, just steady. The dock felt longer now, every step echoing in the space the confrontation had carved out. I didn't look back. Looking back invites pursuit. It tells people you care what happens next. Behind me, the noise changed. Less laughter. More confusion. Anger mixed with embarrassment. That volatile mix can turn reckless fast. I increased my pace just slightly, enough to widen the gap without drawing attention. My scalp still burned where the glass had cut me. Blood felt tacky as it dried along my hairline. My heart rate was elevated now, but controlled. The way it always is after contact, ready, but not wild. I replayed the exchange automatically, already assessing it the way I'd been taught. Force used. Duration. Environment. Witnesses. Everything stayed inside acceptable bounds. No head strikes after the initial contact. No follow-through once space was created. No pursuit. Clean disengagement. They hadn't expected resistance. They definitely hadn't expected discipline. That's the part people misunderstand about training like mine. It doesn't turn you into someone who wants to fight. It turns you into someone who understands exactly when not to. It teaches you that the real measure of control isn't domination. It's restraint under pressure. As I reached the end of the pier, I slowed and blended back into the quiet of the town, just another figure moving through the night. No sirens, no shouting, no audience. The dock settled back into stillness, as if nothing had happened at all. But I knew better. They would spend the rest of that night replaying what went wrong, trying to explain how a situation that felt so certain slipped out of their hands so quickly. They would tell themselves it was luck, or surprise, or anything except the truth. The truth was simpler. They mistook calm for weakness. They mistook silence for surrender. And for a few seconds on a dark dock, they learned how expensive that mistake can be. I made it maybe 20 yards before the sirens cut through the night. Not distant close. Sharp. Blue and red lights spilled across the dock, washing everything in pulses that felt too loud after the quiet I'd just left behind. Someone had called it in. Shouting. A fight. A woman down. I slowed my breathing before anyone told me to. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Hands open, palms visible. Compliance doesn't mean guilt, it means control. By the time the first cruiser skidded to a stop, my posture was neutral, non-threatening, exactly what it needed to be. Hands where I can see them. They already were. Officers moved fast, voices overlapping, commands bouncing off the warehouses and water. I didn't move until told. Didn't speak until asked. The men were louder. One of them pointed. Another cursed. A third tried to explain everything at once. Alcohol turned urgency into chaos. They separated us. Space again. Always space. Questions came quickly, clipped and sharp. What happened? Where did it start? Did I know them? Did I throw the first punch? I answered calmly, evenly, in order. No extra details. No editorializing. Just facts, the way you're trained to report after an incident when every word matters. My story didn't change. Theirs did. One said I attacked without warning. Another said I slipped and fell and they tried to help. A third claimed he never touched me at all. Their timelines didn't line up. Their descriptions contradicted each other. The confidence they'd had on the dock evaporated under scrutiny, replaced by irritation and blame shifting. An officer crouched to my eye level and asked if I needed medical attention. I nodded once and pointed to my head. He looked closer then, really looked. Dried blood in my hair, small cuts where glass had broken skin. His jaw tightened just a fraction. Any training? He asked, not accusing, just curious. I paused. There's a moment like that where you decide how much truth is necessary. You don't lie, you just don't offer more than the situation requires. I'm active duty Navy, I said, on leave. That was enough. His posture changed immediately, not dramatically. Just a shift, shoulders squared. Voice dropped half a register. The questions that followed were more precise, more respectful. He asked where I was stationed. I answered generally. Asked what my role was. I kept it vague. Support. Logistics. Training. All true. All incomplete. They found the bottle a few minutes later, broken near the piling where I'd braced myself. Clear glass, edges still sharp, someone bagged it carefully. Another officer spoke with a fisherman who'd been loading gear a little farther down the pier. The man gestured animatedly, pointing back toward the truck, mimicking a swing with his arm. His account matched mine. The night began to deflate. Names were run. One of the men had a prior assault charge. Another had outstanding fines. None of it helped them. Their volume dropped as reality set in. When the cuffs went on, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, just metal clicking closed and shoulders slumping under the weight of consequence. I watched from a distance, detached. The adrenaline had burned off, leaving a heavy, familiar exhaustion in its place. The kind that settles into your bones after a long op when the danger passes and everything you've been holding back finally catches up. A medic waved me over to the ambulance. I climbed up onto the back step and sat while he cleaned the cut on my head. The antiseptic stung more than the injury itself. He worked carefully, apologizing every time I flinched. I told him it was fine. It was. He asked what happened. I gave him the same clean version I'd given the police. He nodded, not prying. People in emergency work learn quickly when not to ask for details they don't need. As he taped the dressing in place, I looked past him and saw the men sitting on the curb, wrists cuffed behind their backs. They looked smaller now, folded in on themselves, avoiding eye contact. None of them looked tough. None of them looked in control. I didn't feel satisfaction. That surprised me a little, even though it shouldn't have. People expect moments like that to feel victorious. Like you've proven something. Like the world balances itself neatly. It doesn't work that way. What I felt was tired. Bone deep. The kind of tired that comes from being reminded, all at once, of how thin the line is between normal and dangerous. How quickly a quiet walk can turn into paperwork, flashing lights, and explanations you never planned to give. An officer returned my ID and thanked me for cooperating. He told me I was free to go once the medic cleared me. His tone was respectful, careful. He didn't ask more questions. He didn't need to. I slid off the ambulance and pulled my jacket tighter against the cold. The dock was almost empty now, the scene already dissolving back into darkness. The water moved the same way it always had. The town would wake up the next morning, and nothing about it would look different. I walked home alone, slower this time, feeling every step. I didn't replay the strike. I didn't replay the fall. I replayed the restraint. The choice to stop when I did. The choice to leave when I could have stayed. The choice to protect myself without becoming the thing they expected me to be. That's the part that stays with you. Not the fight, the control. The adrenaline didn't fade all at once. It leaked out of me slowly on the drive back to my sister's house, like air hissing from a tire you didn't realize had been punctured. My hands started to shake once I was alone with the road and the dark. Not fear. Release. The delayed reaction that comes when the body finally understands it's allowed to stand down. Streetlights passed in steady intervals, yellow pools of light. Darkness in between. I kept my speed even, eyes scanning mirrors and intersections out of habit. Training doesn't shut off just because you tell it to. It waits. It watches. It fills the quiet when there's nothing else left. That's when the replay started. Not the bottle. Not the impact. Those moments were already filed away, categorized, controlled. What surfaced instead was the hesitation, the pause before everything tipped. The second where I told myself this was home, not a hostile zone, that the rules were different here. That assumption had almost cost me more than blood. There's a thin line between control and catastrophe. I've walked it before in places far louder and more violent than a dock at night, but walking it at home felt different, more personal, less forgiving. Overseas, the rules are clear. Here, they blur. Intent gets questioned. Actions get reinterpreted. Outcomes linger longer. I pulled into my sister's driveway and sat there for a full minute before turning the engine off. The house was dark, except for the porch light she always left on for me. A small thing. A kindness. It hit harder than I expected. Inside, I locked the door out of reflex and leaned against it, breathing in the familiar smell of laundry detergent and old wood. The quiet pressed in again, heavier now that the noise was gone. I could still feel the sting on my scalp where the medic had cleaned the cut. I touched it lightly and pulled my fingers back when they came away damp. Sleep didn't come easy. I lay on the guest bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. Pipes ticking, a refrigerator humming. Normal sounds that felt too loud, too close. Every creak registered as movement. Every passing car outside spiked my awareness. My body refused to believe the danger had passed just because logic said it had. That's the part no one sees. They see the headlines when things go wrong, the viral clips, the courtroom footage. They don't see the aftermath that plays out in silence, the hours where your mind won't let go, where your nervous system stays coiled, waiting for something else to happen. I replayed the sequence again, slower this time. Not to glorify it, to audit it. That's what training does. It forces you to review. What did you miss? What did you assume? What would you change if it happened again? The hesitation stood out every time. Not because it was a mistake, but because it was human. I'd wanted to believe the dock was safe. I'd wanted to believe I could exist there as just a woman on leave, not a senior chief with years of experience in environments designed to break people. Wanting that didn't make me weak, but it did make me vulnerable. That realization sat heavy. At some point near dawn, exhaustion finally outweighed vigilance. I slept in fragments. Short, shallow stretches punctuated by half-dreams and sharp wakes. In one, I was back on the dock, the laughter looping endlessly without impact. In another, I was explaining myself to someone who never quite believed me. When morning came, it arrived quietly. Pale light through the curtains, the distant sound of gulls, coffee brewing somewhere in the house, normal life resuming without ceremony. I showered and watched diluted blood spiral down the drain, then stood under the water longer than necessary, letting the heat work some of the tension out of my shoulders. In the mirror, the cut looked smaller than it felt. A thin line hidden by hair, proof, but not much of one. At the kitchen table, my sister asked if I was okay. I said yes. She nodded, accepting the answer without pushing. She's known me long enough to recognize when not to ask follow-ups. Later that day, I took a walk in daylight. Same docks. Same water. Everything looked harmless now. Families passed by. A man waved from his boat. No trace of the night before. If I hadn't felt the soreness in my body, I could have convinced myself it never happened. But that's how it always is. The world doesn't pause to acknowledge restraint. It doesn't mark the moments where something could have gone much worse and didn't. It just keeps moving. I understood then why that exhaustion felt so deep. It wasn't just physical. It was the weight of holding two identities at once. The trained professional who knows exactly what she's capable of, and the woman trying to exist peacefully in a place that doesn't know how dangerous assumptions can be. Training never really turns off. It doesn't fade with time or distance. It sits quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when choice matters more than instinct. That night on the dock reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. Control isn't about what you do when things go right. It's about what you don't do when everything goes wrong. And the part no one ever applauds, the part that stays with you long after the sirens fade, is the discipline it takes to walk away carrying restraint instead of regret. A few days later, I was back on base, sitting under fluorescent lights and finishing paperwork that had nothing to do with docks or broken bottles. Forms, signatures, routine, the kind of administrative gravity that pulls you back into structure, whether you're ready or not. A junior sailor stopped by my desk with a question about a training log. He hesitated before asking it, like he wasn't sure where the line was. Then he said, almost casually, "Senior Chief, how do you stay so calm when things go bad?" He didn't know about the docks. He wasn't asking about that night. He was asking about everything. About deployments. About emergencies. About moments when voices get loud and people freeze. I didn't have a clean answer for him then. I said something practical. Muscle memory. Repetition. Experience. All true. All incomplete. He nodded, satisfied enough, and went back to his work. What I wanted to say was harder to explain. I wanted to tell him that panic wastes time, that it narrows your vision until you can't see the exit that's been there all along. That discipline doesn't make you fearless. It gives you somewhere to stand when fear shows up uninvited. I wanted to tell him that strength isn't measured by how hard you can hit, but by how well you can decide not to. That restraint is an act of choice, not the absence of one. That knowing exactly what you're capable of is what makes walking away possible. But lessons like that don't land in a conversation between tasks. They settle in slowly, over years, shaped by moments you don't advertise. That night at the docks changed how I saw home. I'd always thought of danger as something with clear markers: foreign streets, unfamiliar terrain, radios buzzing with warnings. The docks reminded me that danger doesn't wear uniforms. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up where you least expect it and tests you when you're tired enough to believe you can finally relax. It also reminded me of something else. Capability doesn't wear uniforms either. Most people never see it. They don't recognize it when it's quiet. They don't notice it when it chooses patience over spectacle. They assume strength has a certain look, a certain volume. That assumption is what gets them hurt. Back on base, surrounded by routine, I understood why the question had lingered with me. Calm isn't something you summon in the moment. It's something you build long before you need it. Brick by brick, drill by drill, decision by decision. You build it by learning to slow your breathing when your body wants to sprint. You build it by thinking 2 steps ahead instead of reacting to the first insult. You build it by accepting responsibility for every outcome, even the ones you prevent. That's what training really gives you, not aggression, not bravado, clarity. The docks didn't make me proud. They made me aware. Aware of how thin the line is between order and chaos. Aware of how easily situations turn permanent when ego replaces judgment. Aware of how much effort it takes to protect yourself without becoming someone you don't recognize afterward. When I looked at the junior sailors moving through the passageways, laughing, complaining, carrying coffee cups and tool bags, I hoped they'd never need to learn that lesson the hard way. But if they did, I hoped they'd remember this. Staying calm isn't about being unafraid. It's about choosing control when panic offers you shortcuts. That night didn't turn me into something new. It reminded me of what I already was and what I had worked years to protect. Home wasn't softer than the world I'd come from. It was just quieter. And sometimes quiet is where the hardest discipline lives. The incident never made the news. There were no headlines, no viral clips, no morning after speculation. No one framed it as a story worth telling. It was logged, categorized, and closed the way thousands of minor incidents are every year. Another report number in a system designed to move on. That should have been the end of it. But it stayed with me, not the violence, not the glass or the shove or the moment bodies hit the planks. Those details faded quickly, filed away where experience keeps them. What lingered was the restraint, the deliberate choice to stop when I could have gone further. The decision to walk away with my life intact, my freedom untouched, and my career still mine. People talk a lot about survival. They talk less about what comes after surviving, about the cost of choosing control when chaos offers a faster release. That cost doesn't leave marks you can point to. It settles in quietly, asking questions you don't answer right away. I thought about how close it came. Not to death, but to something worse. One extra strike. One moment of lost discipline. One decision made out of anger instead of judgment, and everything I'd worked for could have ended on that dock. Years of service reduced to a headline that would never include context, never include restraint, never include the effort it took not to escalate. That realization didn't scare me. It sobered me. I kept thinking about the report. How clinical it was, how flat the language felt compared to the weight of the moment. Altercation, minor injury, No further action required. The words were accurate. They just weren't complete. Paperwork rarely is. In the days that followed, I found my thoughts drifting to women I'd known over the years. Not just in uniform, but outside it. Friends, teammates, strangers whose stories surfaced briefly before being replaced by something else. Women who never got the chance to choose restraint because no one gave them options. I thought about how many of them walked alone without training to fall back on, without muscle memory to slow their breathing, without the ability to read danger early enough to adjust. I thought about how many didn't have backup arriving with sirens, or witnesses willing to speak up, or officers who recognized the signs and asked the right questions. That thought carried more weight than any bruise. Because training doesn't make you invincible. It gives you choices. And choice is a privilege too many people never get. I didn't feel guilt about what I did. I felt responsibility for what I could do next. I started paying more attention after that. To how often women are told to stay polite, to avoid conflict, to not make a scene. To how quickly accountability shifts onto them the moment something goes wrong. To how rarely restraint is recognized unless it fails. There's a quiet expectation placed on women, especially women who are capable to absorb, to de-escalate, to smooth things over. To be strong without being threatening, controlled without being cold. That balancing act is rarely acknowledged and almost never praised. That night on the dock wasn't heroic. It didn't deserve a medal, but it mattered. It mattered because it showed me how thin the margin is between dignity and disaster, and how much discipline it takes to protect both. I realized then that the story wasn't about what I did to them. It was about what I chose not to do. That distinction matters, especially in a world that only pays attention when things explode. Restraint doesn't trend. Quiet decisions don't circulate, but they shape lives all the same. I found myself thinking about junior sailors, about women just starting their careers, about civilians who would never receive the kind of preparation I had. I wondered how many of them would face moments where they had to make impossible choices with no training to guide them. And I wondered what responsibility came with knowing how to choose better. The incident didn't change how I saw violence. It changed how I saw strength. Strength isn't about dominating a moment. It's about exiting it with as little damage as possible, to yourself and to others. It's about leaving room for consequences to land where they belong. I didn't talk about the dock much after that, not because I was hiding it, but because it didn't need telling in the way people expect stories to be told. There was no lesson that fit neatly into a soundbite, no single takeaway that felt sufficient. What remained was quieter than that, an awareness that restraint is an active skill, that walking away intact is sometimes the hardest outcome to earn, that survival isn't just about making it through the moment, it's about what you carry forward when the moment ends. That night never followed me into the news cycle. It never earned public attention, but it stayed with me in the spaces between routine and rest, reminding me of something simple and uncomfortable. Not everyone gets to choose restraint. Not everyone gets to walk away. And knowing how to do both doesn't make you powerful. It makes you responsible. I still walk near the water when I'm home. I still stop and listen to the waves hit the pilings, still breathe in the salt and diesel, and let the sound slow my thoughts. But I don't confuse quiet with safety anymore. I know better now. I know how easily silence can hide intent, and how quickly a familiar place can turn sharp. That night was never about proving who I was. I didn't need witnesses. I didn't need explanations. It was about remembering it for myself, about carrying discipline into a place where no one expected it, and responsibility into a moment where anger would have been easier. Anger always offers shortcuts. Discipline asks for patience instead. Being a woman in the military teaches you control long before it teaches you force. You learn early that survival isn't loud, that strength doesn't announce itself, that the real test isn't what you can do to someone, but what you choose not to do when you could. I didn't need them to know I was a Navy SEAL. I didn't need the label to land or the story to travel. I needed to know I could leave with my life intact, my career untouched, and my sense of self unbroken. I needed to know that I could walk away without becoming someone I wouldn't recognize the next morning. Some lessons come from firefights and faraway places. Others come quietly, on docks in small towns, with salt air in your lungs and broken glass under your feet. Those lessons don't fade as fast. They stay with you. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.